Okay, move the mic over so you can actually hear me. So the goal of today is a hand. I copied to your desktops a couple of reference images from hands. I got these hands from CG Tuts. CG Tuts. I don't have the history. CG Tantra, maybe? No, that wasn't it. Anyway, I did a search for hands or hand reference images and found said images. So search the internet, you'll find images. You can take pictures of your own hand. We won't be using them to exactly trace. Once we get kind of the basic form, we'll probably just turn off the background images and use our own hands that are attached to our bodies as the best reference. So let's get started. If you have the base mesh, we're going to do it in the same file, but on a different layer. So I'm going to just right away go to layer 2, right down here. And I'm going to load in the reference images. So, and to bring up the properties, excuse me. I'm going to turn off the eyeball on my body reference images and add a couple of images and navigate to where I have them stored. Reference, oops, not hand, it's actually here. And whoops, mail 1, open image. Whoa, had an error, hold on. Mail 1, hand. There we go. That is enormous. Oh, there's an alpha channel. That's nice. Okay, so that's hand 1 and hand 2. Okay. So first thing I want to do is get these set up and aligned. So let's. So I'm going to center the first hand. So I turn the second hand off and just I'm going to center the first hand. Go along the middle knuckle and then the middle of the palm, I think will be pretty good. And then I'm going to turn on the front and I'm just going to do my best to align it pretty close.
I want to scale this down.
We will need to scale it a touch. Let's see. That was too much. Yeah, it's not gonna line up exactly, that's for sure. But the widths of the middle fingers are pretty close, and then let's just get, we'll say right about there will be close. We're only gonna use one view for the general outline, and the second one will be more of a reference. And then let's set the front to be visible in the front view and the back to be visible in the back view. So front and then control 1 on the number pad, you can see the back view. Actually, you know what? I'm going to change this up a little bit. I'm going to set my back view image to the top, and then I'm going to set my front view image to the bottom, and that's just so that as I rotate my view around, the top of the hand will be up here, and it'll just kind of make more sense for me as I move forward. So I've got the image that's called hand 1 back as my top view, and the image that is called hand 1 front as my bottom view. Okay. So I've got my hands and I'm ready to start modeling it. And as I said, we're going to do this in a poly modeling method as opposed to box modeling or sculpting. So let's get started. First thing that I want to do, hide that, is add a circle. So Shift A, mesh, circle. Immediately hit F6. I'm going to change the number of vertices to 12, I think. Okay. I'm going to tab to go into edit mode. And I'm going to rotate this around the y-axis 90 degrees. Okay, so you can see it right there. And I'm going to move it back along the x-axis to right about here. Scale it along the y, so it's about the width of the wrist. And scale it along the z-axis, so it's, again, close to wrist shape. Feel free to use your own wrist as reference. Okay. The next thing that I'm going to do, if you recall from the topology video that we watched, there's edge loops here around the wrist, and then also there's a main one across the hand. So let's hit Shift A, or with this circle selected, Shift D to duplicate it, and we're going to move it up to this part of the hand, rotate it a little bit, scale it. When I scale, I'm going to hit Shift Z so that it doesn't get any taller. Okay, I don't want it to get super huge and fat. Rotate a little bit and just kind of line it up kind of close. About there, I think. Okay. And then let's also add the main edge loops for the fingers. And so for that, I'm going to add a new circle, Shift A, circle, and I'm going to hit F6 and change it to 8 vertices. Hit Enter. Okay. Now I'm going to rotate it around the y-axis, 90 degrees. And I'm going to move it over to the middle finger and scale it down so it lines up pretty close. Okay, so this is where I'm at so far. Not quite at a hand yet, but the basis is there. So the next step is to take the circle that I have for the middle finger and hit Shift D and duplicate it and move it to the base of the other fingers. And I'm just going to duplicate, rotate it, and scale it. I'll do it also for the thumb. Now the thumb in this picture is not on the same plane as the rest of the knuckles, so we're going to have to use a little bit of judgment and artistic interpretation to get something that feels right. But approximate to your best guess. Take that one again and duplicate that for the ring finger. And I want them to be, I want the circles to be perpendicular to the direction of the finger. And again, the pinky here is not quite on the same plane, so that will have to be interpreted a little bit. I'll scale this one down a touch too. Okay. Now when we actually model the fingers, we're really only going to need to model one finger, and then we can duplicate that finger and attach it at the other points, because all fingers are fairly similar. It'll just be an issue of scaling where necessary to get the right form and shape. Okay, so now if I rotate around 3D view, you can kind of start to see that there will at some point be a hand there. And actually I might take this middle edge loop and scale it along the z-axis just a little bit. Something more like that feels pretty close, I think. A little squatter. Okay. So now let's actually get some faces going. So I'm going to take the wrist and I'm going to extrude that out forward a little bit until the faces are square-ish, and then I'll scale it up, Shift Z to exclude the z-axis, and just kind of get the indication there. Actually, I think we'll go to about there. Let's try to get the indication of a wrist. Okay. Then I'm going to do the same with the kind of central edge loop. Extrude. And then I'm going to scale that down, Shift Z. So it's pretty close. Now is a good opportunity while I think of it to rename the object from circle to hand. Okay. Now I want to look at these fingers and get them connected back to the rest of the hand. And the way that I'm going to do that is, we know we've got a little bit of webbing in between our fingers. So that's the next area that we're going to worry about. So I'm going to take between the first and the middle finger. I'm going to hit F to fill in that edge. And actually, I can just fill in that face up on the top there, and the one underneath. Fill that in. I'm going to do the same between the middle finger and the ring finger. And the same between the pinky, and the ring finger. Now you can see these faces are a little askew, and they shouldn't be quite like that. They should actually, more or less, the circles should be pointing towards each other. So I'm going to select this circle, and then in top view I'm going to rotate it a little bit and move it. And then I'm going to do the same with the pinky as well. And actually that should be scaled up a little bit too, I think. Alright. So I've got those connected. I'm also going to add in one edge loop between them, so Control R, and then just center it there. Okay, and then I'm going to select all three edge loops, and I'm going to move them back along the x-axis just to get a little bit of that form in there. Okay. Alright, so now we need to move these back and connect it to this edge right here. So I'm going to extrude this out actually a little bit more to about there, I think. Will be good. Make sure that I'll scale that up just a touch, I think. Okay. The next thing to do is to take a minute to think about how the hand is actually constructed. It's good practice when you're laying out your topology to have the topology align with the musculature and the bone structure of your hand to a certain degree, as that's what governs how, muscles and bones govern how your hand moves, and likewise the mesh governs how your hand in 3D will animate. So they're very much related. Now on your fingers, you've got tendons that run up the back middle of your hands, and so we want to have an edge that will also follow that path. So if we look at these circles, you can see that we have a vertex right on the top there, so we want that to be what flows back to the hand. But we need edge loops on the hand to line up with that. So I think we're going to need to add a little bit more topology here. The first thing that I want to do is add in the edge loops for the tendons that go along the knuckles, because I want the topology to follow actual anatomy. So starting with the ring finger, I want an edge loop to line up with this top vert at the base of the ring fingers, or the middle finger. So Control R, add in an edge loop, right click to keep it roughly in the center. I'm going to hit Alt S to scale it up just a little bit. And I'll do that for the gaps between the other fingers. Alt S, scale it up a little bit. And one here. Alt S. You may need to go back to top view. You may need to edge slide some things around, so to do that, just select the edge loop, double tap G, and slide it. Add one more for the first finger. Alt S to scale it up a little bit. Maybe a little bit more. Oops. Alt S. Okay. So now we've got the edge loops in line with the fingers where we want them. So now you can select the top middle and just fill those in. And you can start to see the mesh kind of emerge. Okay. Then you can fill in the faces on either side of those edges that we just added. So I'm going to select these 4 verts, hit F to fill them. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of that. Okay. Do the same thing with the ring finger. Fill that in. Give you a different view of it. Oops. Fill that in. Now you notice we're leaving a diamond quad shaped hole, and I will talk about that in just a second. Fill that in. Fill that in. And then go back to the first finger. Fill that in. And fill that in. Okay. So I've got these diamond quad shaped holes, and I could just select these 4 vertices and hit F, but I don't like how elongated these quads are. So I'm going to undo that, and actually I'm going to add in an edge loop in between first and hit Alt S to scale it up a little bit. And I'm going to do that for each of these sections. Yeah, that'll be good. Scale it up just a little bit. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill these diamond quads in like this. I can bridge this gap right here, hit F, and then I'm going to hit W and subdivide it once to give me that extra vert in the middle. I'll move that down just a touch. And from the top view, I'm going to move it over just a little bit. Okay, so now I can fill this in as a quad, and I can fill this in as a quad, and then I will fill this diamond quad in right there. Okay, and I'm going to do the same thing for the other gaps. So select these 2 edges, fill that in, W, subdivide, move that down just a little bit, move it out just a little bit. Oops. There we go. And then fill that in, fill that in, fill that in, and once more between the ring and the middle finger. Fill the edge, subdivide it, adjust the location of the vert, and then fill in the faces. Oops. And then, because I have those dark faces, I'm going to select everything and Control N to recalculate the normals. And that's how I've connected to the top. Okay, you can start to see the basis of a hand, or at least a mitt or a paw. We are going in the right direction. Save my file because I don't have to keep redoing this. All right, so if I look at the side of the hand, these are pretty obvious quads to fill in. And then I just need to add in another edge loop here and Alt S to scale it up a bit. Yeah, just a little bit. And then I'm just going to merge these 2 verts together. So W, merge at center. And then on the other side, it's the same thing. So I can select these 4, fill that in, and fill that in. Add in my edge loop, Alt S, just a little bit, and then merge these 2, W, merge at center. Okay, so that's the top and the sides of the hand. It's the same process underneath. So I'm going to add in the edge loops in the center, select them all, and Alt-S to scale them up just a touch. Looking at my hand, I'm actually going to scale them so they bulge just a little bit. Again, you can always adjust that later on. And then, as before, I'm going to connect the center edges. Okay, that looks about right. And then fill in the faces on either side of the edges. Now you can just fill in the faces straight away, but sometimes I like to fill in the edges first and just make sure that I'm going about it the way that I want to. So fill these in. Okay. Add in your center edge loops. I'm going to select them all at the same time with Shift Option right click. Alt S to scale up along the normals a little bit. Not that much. Actually, as I think about where this is on the hand, it should actually form a bit of a crease. So I'm going to bring them down a little bit. On the edges here, where it connects to the side of the hand, I'm going to merge those two together. So W merge at center. W merge at center. Okay. Then I just have these holes to fill in. So again, fill that edge and subdivide it. And I'm going to Control 7 to see it from the underside. And just move that out a little bit and move it down a little bit. I can fill those in like that. Okay. So same thing 2 more times. Fill, subdivide, move it a little bit. Period on the number pad will focus your view on whatever your selection is. So if I'm way out over here and I don't know exactly where my selection is, I hit period and it will reframe it up. It'll work with a vert, it'll work with a face, or it'll work with everything, just depending what you have selected. Okay, so then I can fill these in and rotate around so I can see what I'm selecting. Fill, fill, and one last time. Fill that in, that in. Oh, I want the whole thing, just that. And fill that in. Okay. So I've got the basis of my hand. The next thing that I'm going to do, I think, is fingers. And for the fingers, I'm just going to do one to start, and then I can copy that over to the rest of the hand as needed and save myself some time. So I'm going to select the middle finger base edge loop. I'm going to go to the top view. I'm going to hit E to extrude and move that out to right about there. Okay, and then I'm going to scale it down like so. Okay, and then I'm going to fill in the edges, and I will fill it in just like this. Connect to the top and the bottom. Fill. I'm going to subdivide it and move this center one out along the x-axis just a little bit. Okay, and now I've got the ability to fill in. Whoa. I just went into free fly mode, which you don't want to do. So fill these in as all quads, like that. Okay. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 2 edge loops for my joints. One there and one there. Okay. And I'm going to, if you hold your hand out to the side, you can kind of see that at the joints, they're a little bit skinnier than they are in between the joints. And so to replicate that, actually first I'm going to scale all of it, or individually maybe, scale along the z-axis to kind of flatten them out just a little bit. And move it up a little maybe. Same thing for this one, S, Z, and move it up a little bit. And the same thing with the end here. Just going to control, click, and drag. S, Z, whoops, S, Z, and move it up a little bit. And move that in. It's out a little too far. Here we go. Okay. So I've got those, got my key joints laid out. I'm going to add in an edge loop in between the joints, and I'm going to scale it up a little bit. And I'm going to move it down because I want the tops of my fingers to be pretty flat. You know, again, as you hold your fingers out, you can kind of see that the bulge is on the underside of the finger, not as much on the top. Obviously, your hands may vary to mine, but that's at least how my hands work. So I'm going to move that back down a little bit and do the same thing for this first joint. Scale it up a little bit and then move it down. And once more here. I'm going to scale it up a little bit and move it down. Okay. And go something like that, I think. Looks good. Okay, so now we're slowly developing a rather obscene gesture, actually. But let's move on to further detailing. A good rule of thumb with joints is to have 3 edge loops define any joint, and it'll just help with, again, deformation, as many of the things and many of the reasons why we use the topology that we do. So I'm going to add in edge loops on either side of my joints. Actually, I'll add one in at the base as well. I'm going to scale the base one up a little bit, I think. Okay. And then on the underside of those joints, the edge loops that I just added, if you look at your hand, you've got a little bit of a crease. And if I go actually to the bottom view, you can kind of see that crease as well. And these don't, my background images don't line up exactly, but that's okay, because I'm just using them more as reference. But you can see that they kind of pinch in a little bit, and they also have a bit of a bow to them. So what I'm going to do, give me just a second. Okay, so what I want to do now is add a little more geometry to define the top kind of joints and then also the creases underneath. And the way that I'm going to do that, I realize I may have slid these in just a little too far. I'm going to slide them back out a touch. Okay. I'm going to inset some faces. So I'm going to go into face select mode. And I'm going to select these 4 faces right here. I'm going to hit I to inset them. I'm going to go right about there. I think looks good. And then I can select these 4 faces in the center, and I'm going to move them up just a little bit. GZ. I'm going to W and smooth once. Just to start to get a feel for the form. At this point too, with I'm going to jump into object mode and just hit Control 2. And what that does is it adds a subsurf modifier at level 2 to my mesh automatically. I can also, if I bring up my toolbar, set the shading to smooth. And now I can, if I zoom back in and hide my toolbar, you can kind of start to see what's happening with that geometry. Now it needs to be smoothed out a little bit more, I think. So I'm going to hit Control plus to grow my selection and smooth that once. With organic modeling especially, the smooth function is very useful if you have any kind of weird edges that you don't quite want. Okay, so I'm going to do the same thing with this joint. So I to inset it, and I'm going to select these 4 faces. I'm going to move them up a little bit, just a little bit. Smooth that once, Control plus, and smooth it, whoops, not scale. W smooth, and maybe smooth it one more time, and move it up again. Okay. So you can start to see the indication of the knuckle there. I might even want to select these 2 vertices and just scale them out from each other. And the same thing over here. Scale those out. Okay. So that's looking pretty good.
They do a fingernail.
So for the underside, I'm going to do something similar, but slightly different. I'm going to select Control 7 to underside. I'm going to select the same or the similar 4 faces, and I'm going to inset them. But instead of scaling them out, I'm going to select these vertices, and I'm going to scale them in. Actually, I'm going to scale them just along the x-axis. That's going to help create that pinch in the finger, and I can move them up a little bit. GZ, just maybe not that far. And then this inner edge, I can move that up a little bit more. Actually, just the center one, I think. GZ. Okay. And then also, as I look at my hands, those lines don't go straight across. They actually kind of dip a little bit. So I'm going to select these and move them back just a touch. And then select those, and actually I'm going to hold down Option and right click on this edge to select this face loop. I'm going to smooth that out once, and then maybe scale these in just a little bit more, like that. Okay, so now we got the indication of that line. Scale these out a little bit too. Okay. So now we're getting close. I'm going to do the same thing again real quick on this joint. Select those, inset, about like that. Select those, scale them in towards each other. I'm going to select, face mode. W smooth it out once more. Scale it in a little bit more. I'm going to move this vert up a little and scale those out away from each other. And I think I'm actually going to scale those in towards each other a little bit more, and then move them all back a touch. Okay, and that I think is too extreme, so I'm just going to W and smooth that out once, and then just scale those back in a touch. Okay. Okay. That's starting to get there. So now let's do the fingernails next. Fingernails, I'm going to select these 4 faces. Actually, I lied. I'm going to go to the top, and I'm going to slide this edge back a little bit. I'm going to add an edge here. Okay. And real quick, I'm going to turn on optimal display. Okay. So select these 4 faces, and then I'm going to inset the face, and to right about there, I think. Then I'm going to select, I think I'll just select these 2 faces and move them up. And let's see. Select these faces again. I'm going to smooth them out. So, oops, W, smooth. Maybe just once. And so depending on what your fingernails actually look like, I'm just going to extrude that up just a little bit. Okay, now I'm going to select these front 2 faces. I'm going to move them from side view, or it's front view, but I'm going to move them out just a little, well, maybe not quite that far. Move it out just a little bit. I'm going to add in one more edge loop just around the fingernail there, just to give me a little bit more control and a little more definition in the front here. So let's see. Oops. Not that one, that one. Okay. Now you'll also know that if, again, you look at your own fingernails, that your finger kind of bulges up around the edges of the nails. So I'm going to select this this edge loop just on these 3 sides. Oops. Double tap G and slide it in a little bit. And then Alt S to scale it up. Okay, and then I think I have to maybe bring the front here down just a little bit. And bring this one, oops, bring it out a little bit. Okay. So now you can kind of see the nail. And I think these, I don't like what it's doing right here, so I'm going to move these 2 in. I'm just going to scale them in, I think. Well, yeah, that helps. Then move them back. Now, this is a pretty small detail for something that's you're not going to see super close. So I don't have to worry about it too much, but I think I am also going to bring the face up a little bit more. Oops, like that. Okay, and then I don't want this to be quite so square, so I'm going to select, let's actually look at our reference. Let's select the corners, so the 3 vertices in each corner, and move them forward. Something like that, I think looks and feels a little bit better. Well, we can also look, it's not quite wide enough. So I'm going to go into, let's see, go into wireframe and box select all of that. And deselect those, oops, and deselect that, and I'm going to hit S and Y, scale it out a little bit. You know, if I look at my finger straight on, the edges of the nails are pretty close. you know, right here is pretty close to the widest part of my finger at that point. So I'm going to scale those out a little bit more. Whoa. And that needs to be smoothed a little bit. I might have gone too far. I'll maybe scale these in a little bit. And so it's a lot of define the form and then spend the next 20 minutes tweaking things back and forth until it feels pretty natural. I'm going to scale in the pad of the finger as well. Try to get that silhouette in the profile. I'm actually going to move this up a bit. I think it's a little too fat. So G and Z. And I'm going to pull these vertices back and these vertices back a little bit. And maybe a little bit more. And then I can move these back a little bit as well. Oops. X. And maybe slide them up. Yeah. Just move them. And that feels closer to the shape of my finger, maybe. Oops. Side or front view. Rotate them. That feels better. Okay. I might also at some point go back, and it feels a little bit too squared off here at the tip, but I want to jump forward a little bit real quick. When you're modeling fingers or really any joints, it's best to model them in a relaxed pose. So I'm going to actually no, I'm gonna relax the pose at the end once everything is said and done, because it's gonna be easier to manipulate it now. So I'm gonna go to top view in wireframe, and I'm gonna copy this to the rest of my hand, or the rest. Yeah, copy this finger to the rest of my hand. So select it, Shift D, and move it over. Going to scale it down just a little bit. Get it pretty close to position. Shift D again. Rotate to about there. Shift D to the pinky. Rotate. Scale it down some more. And Shift D. Actually, I'm not going to duplicate the pinky. I'm going to duplicate the middle finger because it's a bit larger. And I only want to duplicate it up to about here, I think. Yeah. Shift D. Duplicate it, rotate it. Now, the thing also about the thumb is if you kind of hold your hand up sideways, you can see that your thumb is off at an angle. It's not pointed the same direction as the other four of your fingers. And so that's what we want to replicate here. So I'm going to move my view around so that I'm kind of looking down the barrel of the thumb, if you will. And then I'm going to hit R to rotate it, and I'm just going to spin it around to right about there, I think. That looks pretty good. Okay. And then I'm also going to scale it up. Okay. So now it's about connecting the fingers to the mesh. So because we've got the same number of vertices, what we can do is just select both edge loops and then W and bridge edge loops. And then what I'm going to do here, let's see. I'm going to select this one, and I'm just going to slide it one way and slide it back the other way, and that's just going to kind of smooth out the transition. And I'll do the same thing with the other fingers. So select the two edge loops, W, bridge edge loops, and then slide it one way and slide it back the other way. And that one actually might have gone a little too far, so I'm going to scale that down just a touch. Okay. And the same thing here. W, bridge edge loops. GG, GG. Okay. And then the same thing with the thumb. W, bridge edge loops. GG, GG. Okay. Now I think that'll be about it for today. Next week we will finish the hand, get it feeling right, get it relaxed, and get it on the base mesh. But I think this isn't too bad for a day's work. Yeah. That's it.